So the first thing you need whenever you're going to do any kind of image editing project is you need some sort of a goal in mind. Now, for this tutorial, I wanted to kind of touch on the basics of digital editing, and not just in the Adobe Creative Suites. I'm using Photoshop Creative Cloud 2015.5 right now, which is the latest update. But the idea of the layer and the layer mask, it pretty much applies to almost any program that you're going to use and work with digitally. And that's because layers allow you to work non-destructively. That means that your original image or your original asset can be kept completely intact, and everything that you do is reversible up, as long as you do good layer management and, good project planning. So that's kind of what I wanted to kind of touch on the basics of with this. And I thought, what better way to do that than a basic makeup tutorial, where we take one image and we just kind of change the tone, and we change some of the appearance in the image, and just kind of alter it in a very significant way. And the first thing I needed was a subject. Now, I don't have any models on hand to get the type of look that I'm going for, which is sort of this gothic, yeah, kind of like a dark gothic kind of a tone. So I turn to graphicstock.com. Now, if you're just looking for images to work on to practice your image editing, you couldn't do worse. You couldn't do better than Graphic Stock. For $100 annually, I can get anything off of the site that I want. They do have some paid content that isn't included in that, and that's usually like super high end stuff that they just got to make their bottom line somehow. But you get a lot of value for the $100 if all you want to do is just grab images to work with and harness your skills with, and that's exactly what I use them for. And that's where the images that I'm going to be using for today's tutorial came from. So these are I have here in a folder, I have all of the assets that I considered using. I actually have, this is the image that we're going to be creating roughly. We may change it up just a little bit, just depending on mood. Just depending on the mood. So as you can see, I've already done this project once, but I'm going to do a completely new version of it right now. And so here we go. Okay, so now we're over in Photoshop, and the first step in setting up our project is to prepare our canvas and our subject. And I'm going to use this image here, and I'm just going to there's a couple of different ways to inject this onto your canvas. You can right click, find open with, and then go to Photoshop or your image editing program of choice. But it's much easier, I find. And since I usually work with multiple monitors, I've just kind of made a smaller folder here just to demonstrate. You can grab this with your mouse, drag it over, drop it into Photoshop, and it opens up right away. So the next thing we need to do is we need to prepare our canvas. And over here, you'll notice that our first layer has been created. It's by default named background, and it is locked. And the reason it's locked is so that you don't accidentally mess up your original image. So you can, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and duplicate this. And there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can right click, go to duplicate layer, then you get hit OK on the dialog, and then you get a copy. But I like to, for the interest of working a little faster, is just grab that background image, drag it down here on the new layer icon, drop it, and then it automatically copies. And then I will rename that original to show that it is my original work layer. And then I will hit use the eye icon off to the side of the layer, which hides that layer. So you can totally get rid of that right there. And that's really just to protect the original, because as I said, I like to work non-destructively, and that's a really important part of what we're doing. And so any kind of asset that we're going to bring over, we're probably just going to use the same method, which is the drag and drop. So now we are ready to work. Okay, so one of the first things that I'm going to do now that we have set up our canvas is I am going to work a little outside of my normal mode. One of the things I like to do to a lot of my photographs, not all of them, but a lot of times when I'm doing photo editing, I like to add a texture overlay to the entire image. Now, I usually use this as a last resort just to kind of see how it's going to blend in with all of the changes and stuff that I make. But for the interest of giving you a brief introduction to blending modes and kind of showing how that works in the extreme, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop a texture in first. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pull up our assets folder. And what I'm going to use is a sort of, it's a grungy like chalkboard texture. And I'm just going to drag this over and I'm going to drop it. Now the first thing you're going to notice is that I actually dropped it in between my original layer, and I really want that on top, so I'm just going to move that up there. Now you're also going to notice that the image doesn't completely cover our canvas, and that's what we want it to do. So we're going to grab the shift button and hold our mouse, and then when you scale it, it will scale in proportion, so you're not stretching it out from the top or from the sides or whatever. Now, one thing it's important to note is that these are raster graphics, which means you may hear them referred to as bitmapped, and that's because they're built with pixels, and each pixel has a color value and a color detail. And when you scale an image up, the program that is displaying your image takes the color information from the pixel and creates the picture that you're trying to look at. And when you increase that size, eventually the pixel runs out of detail to supply. So as long as you're bumping it up a very, very small amount, it's not noticeable. But when you do something as significant as what I just did, it would be perfectly noticeable. But since this isn't going to be fully visible, it doesn't really matter because we are about to blend this. And when I talk about blending modes here, I mean, basically you can take any layer and put it on top of another layer, and Photoshop has blending options that are found in this menu here. And what a blending mode does is you can take the image on top of another image, and you can tell Photoshop that you want to merge the two images into one another. And if you use a dark option, the Photoshop will look at the layer that you're blending, and it will compare the pixels for the image up underneath and the image on top, and it will give a sort of like priority to, like, if you're using a darkening blending mode like darken or multiply or any of the color burns, linear burns, or anything like that. You can see that Photoshop is giving preference to darker pixels. On the same token, if you wanted to do something lighter, you could go into like the lighter options, which is lighten, screen, color dodge, and you can see that when it blends that texture in, it's factoring the blend based on the light or the darkness of the pixel. And what I want to do here is actually, these right here are more or less lighting blends. And so I usually go with a default of overlay, but in this particular case, it really, really darkens the darker side of this image, and I don't want to do that. So I found that soft light sort of takes, you can see that there was like a dark halo over on both sides of the image, but with soft light, we actually kind of maintain our dark to light tone in the original image, and that's more or less what I'm really trying to get to. But if you go down, there's all sorts of blending modes that you can use, and I encourage you to experiment with these different ones. But for this particular layer, we're going to use soft light. Okay, so I've applied a grungy texture to my image, kind of giving it an old world photo feel. But the colors are far too vibrant for that style. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to want to adjust the tone and the general feeling of the image. Normally, I try to make these adjustments in camera with my exposures and my white balance. But in this case, I didn't take the image and I'm trying to get to a very specific look. So for that, we have all sorts of options in the adjustment layers. And the first stop that I'm going to make here, this icon here is the adjustment layer icon. You click that and you get a menu with all sorts of different options. And different sort of filters. And the one that I'm going to apply for this image is black and white. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that Photoshop makes a really, really good guess as to how your picture is best going to look presented in black and white, but sometimes it doesn't really give you exactly what you want. So you have all these other presets that you can use, or you can make adjustments manually. But what I've found is for a more neutral black and white, the green filter preset is pretty good at this, but I don't want to completely desaturate my image. So the next thing I'm going to do is another method of blending is I'm going to adjust the opacity. And all the opacity is just how much of the layer that you're working on will be visible. And I'm going to go with a very standard. Usually when I want to blend something in uh, without too much drama, I usually go for a 50%. And then I will adjust up or down just depending on the power of the effect. In this case, I get a really good mix of the black and white layer and the layers up underneath it. So 50% is exactly what I want to work on. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to play with the contrast. And there's a couple of different tools for doing this. Levels and curves are my absolute favorite. Levels are awesome because you get a graph to play with and you have all these different tools. You can actually select certain areas on the image that you're working with and boost the contrast with just those particular color tones. And you can get some really, really funky effects and some really, you can really just take that really far. But when I want to make subtle adjustments, I usually go ahead and use levels. And the reason for that is that the graph that you get is very, very basic, and the options you get are very, very basic, and it's really, really good for just doing subtle changes in tone. And in this particular case, I applied a black and white green filter, so I am going to operate on the green channel. Now here, just above your graph, you'll notice you can work across all of your color channels, which is RGB for this particular image. And you have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, and that's what RGB stands for if you hadn't figured it out. But we're going to work on the green channel because that's the focus that I put on the filter when I applied the black and white filter. So now we're just going to sort of play with all that. Down here at the bottom where you put your inputs in, you'll notice that there are three colored picks. One is darker, one is lighter, and one is gray. And these are just symbolic representations. The middle are midtones, which are things that are in between light and dark. Then your white pick over here is for your highlights. That's going to affect the brightest points of your image. So if you grab that and you drag it, it'll affect that stuff. Then your darker pick is where your shadows, and you adjust that, and then you get changes in the darker parts of your image. What I like to do is I like to start playing with my midtones, but like I said, I wanted to do really, really subtle jumps. So I do increments of small 0.5 steps. So we'll drop that there, and yeah, we change. Not quite what I want. Jump up to 1.1. That's okay. And let's play with these blues just a little bit. No, not quite there. There we go. And that's a pretty good tone, but it's not really what I'm looking for. We did affect the green channels that we focused on with our black and white. So let's go to blue. Let's apply those same changes and see what we get. Still not this closer. There we go. Kind of a blue. It really just kind of cooled out image in total. And let's see what happens. Boost this blue up just a little bit. Brings us back to where we were. No, let's go with 12 on the shadows, and then we get sort of a really cool color to kind of accentuate the texture that we put on here. And you can see on the bottom that we have artifact, like grungy artifacts and stuff from our texture. So the color that we've applied on here with our levels adjustments and our black and white adjustment is really working together to sort of accentuate that. So let's go ahead too and do some layer management, and we will name this for black and white. And we'll call this step 5 for tone. For texture. You know what? That's step 2. I totally numbered these all. Correct that. Throw my layer count off. Okay, great. So yeah, that's basically how you'll change like the color tones and the general feeling of an image. Okay, so now we've set the mood of our image and we've created some tone. Now it's time to get into one of my favorite aspects of editing, and we're going to get into the eyes. And the reason the eyes are so important to me is because when you first start getting into photography, you learn that the central point of focus for your model should be the eyes. And the reason for that is because the eyes are a focal point. And the old cliche is that the eyes are the windows of the soul. And I really believe that. I believe that when you make eye contact with a person, there's a really like a personal connection there. I hesitate to use the word intimate because we make contact with strangers every day, but I think also that's why in some cultures there's taboo about making eye contact. And anyway, so that's one of my favorite aspects of anything working with images. Is I love the eyes. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this model's eyes and we're going to try and do we're going to take it to a very extreme place. Now, even when you're not going to do to eyes what we're about to do, anytime in post-processing, you always want to pay a little bit of attention to the eyes. Even if all you're doing is making a selections and making a curves adjustment, you really want to pay attention to and spend some time with the eyes, because they're very important part of an image. And if you boost the contrast on eyes, it will really make your image stand out, and it'll make them really pop. So but in this case, we're going to do something very extreme, and we're going to start out by going here to our adjustment layer menu. We're going to grab a solid color adjustment layer and we're going to add it. It really doesn't matter what color you choose here, because we are free to make changes later down the road. And I usually just try to grab a really extreme color just to kind of see how the effect is going to work. And so I just grabbed this really extreme purple that was on my color picker by default. I probably won't stay with the purple, but it's an excellent place to start. And I generally find that lightning works really well when it comes to eyes and makeup and things of that nature. But you can actually go through your adjustment layers and just pay real close attention to what's going on with the eyes, because that is the only thing, once we paint on our mask, that's going to be seen. So just pay a lot of attention to that stuff right there. I'm going to go with screen for now, but usually I end up with a dodge. But that brings us to the layer mask. And what the layer mask does is it is a means of blocking out some aspects of a layer so that it can work with the layers below it, and even in some cases the layers above it. And the theory of the layer mask is very simple. When the layer mask is white, the full effect or anything that is under that area of the mask will show through. when the mask is painted with black, uh, the the layer is completely blocked from the layers below it, and so you can actually paint on a white mask. You can paint areas out of the layer, or you can do vice versa. Now, since the area that we want to show through is very small, it makes more sense to start out with a completely black mask. And you can grab a brush and you can paint that manually, or you can take a little shortcut that I've learned over the years, and that's to make sure that your mask is selected. Go to your keyboard and hit Control I, and that automatically, what it does is inverts the color from white to black. And the reason it chooses that color is because over here in my foreground background color area, the top color is your foreground and the bottom color is your background. When you hit Control I, whatever your background color is will be applied to the mask. So one more aspect of mask that I find is really, really cool is that aside from white and black, you can actually use variations of gray to create uh, more control over opacity. And that's, say, instead of using, like most of the time when you want to control opacity, you'll grab your opacity setting over here and then you'll raise it or drop it as necessary. But the thing is, that applies to the entire layer. But let's say you wanted 100% opacity on the left side of your image and 0% opacity on the other side, or you wanted to do something extreme. Well, that's where layer mask comes in, and you can use white, black, and gray to take total control over how your layer presents. But in this case, like I said, we're doing something very simple and just going to focus on the eyes. So we have our black layer mask in place. We want to make sure that our foreground color is white, and we want to use a brush. Now, when I work with the eyes, I don't want a completely soft brush, and I don't want a completely hard brush. And by that, I mean, when you choose a brush with 100% hardness, the outside edge of that brush is a solid line. So if I have a round brush with 100% hardness, it's basically going to put a circle every time I depress the brush. Instead, what I really like to do when I'm editing is I like to use brushes with different softness. And what that does is it gradiates the color outwards. So you get a really nice soft edge, and it's really good for blending is primarily what I use it for, is blending things in. But in this case, I don't want 100% hardness, but I don't want it to be completely soft either. So I am going to work with a brush with a hardness of about 40% so that the brush doesn't start gradiating till much further out in the area that I'm working in. So I'm going to grab the magnification tool, and when we're working on the eyes, you really want to get as much detail in there as you can. So use your magnification tool and increase the size of your canvas like this. Now, if you hit the space bar, you get the little hand icon that will allow you to grab the area that you're working on and put it wherever it is that you want on your canvas. So now that we've got the eye kind of front and center, you know what? I'm going to make that just a tad larger. Yeah, like that. Grab our brush. Now we've already set our hardness. Make sure your opacity and your flow is at 100%, and your foreground color is set to white. Make sure your mask is highlighted. There will be when your mask is highlighted, you'll get an outline around it. So you can go back and forth between adjusting your color or your mask. In this case, we want to work with our mask. Eyes are real simple. As far as working with masking, I just make the brush with 40% hardness just a little bit bigger the entire area that I'm trying to work with, and I just do that. Now you see how the color just sort of gradiates out. Of course, we're spilling over the lid, and that's not a problem. Like I said, that's the power of layer mask. So what we'll do here is we'll switch back to our black. We will shrink our brush down so that we get a little bit more control. And just so you're wondering, the keyboard shortcut that I use to get control of my brush while I'm painting, instead of going up here and making a really lengthy adjustment, is I use the bracket keys. And the first bracket will make your brush smaller, and the second bracket makes it larger. And it's super easy to apply. So then we'll just go in here and we'll just paint this out. Sure, this is off the lash. And in the case of tiny lashes, actually, wait. I can paint that lash back in later, so it's not that big of a deal. And then I'm going to go in here and want to kind of clear that area because the color of the pupil wouldn't really change like that. And I didn't want to overlay it quite like that. So if you want to see the effect, and this is only one eye, we'll just grab our magnification tool and zoom out. And when you get, the further out you get, the better it looks. Okay, so it's gonna require a little bit more work, but first let me go in here and we're gonna do the same thing this eye. Our color is white. That, go back to black, bring down our brush. Spilled over, just add here. Off the pupil here. Now these are very, very basic changes. If this was something that I was doing for a client, I would probably go in and I might actually use lines to paint the effect in, and I would probably use some sort of an adjustment around the outside part of the eye, but I'm trying to do something that's just kind of quick and painless just to kind of introduce the concept without because if I was going to do this like I was doing for an actual client, I would probably spend a lot longer on the effect itself. So now we're going to zoom out until we get back to here. Now that's a pretty good effect. This right here would work, you know, much anything basic, but I didn't really like that blend mode, but it's really hard to tell when all the colors are there. So sometimes what I like to do, chromagia, is to go back in and then just kind of play with the blend modes and see what gives me the absolute, the best blend. Because sometimes what works on one image, because of the lighting and the makeup of the image, the composition of the image itself, may not work on, you know, across the board always. I like soft light best. I also like the dodges. Color dodge, not in this case. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Then we can go in here. We're also using a very extreme color, so we can actually go in here and just kind of mellow it out just a tad, make it, even though it's an extreme color, you could still just kind of mellow it out and make it more applicable to what it is that you're doing. And in the promo image, I made that green, but you know what? I'm gonna kind of low key this time. And here, play with these just another round just to make sure I'm getting the best effect possible. You know what? I am gonna go soft light. No, I'm not. I'm so indecisive sometimes when it comes to color. So yeah, let's just roll with that. Now we come to kind of a challenging area. At least it's a challenging area for me, which is the lips. And the theory for changing the lip color is the exact same theory behind what we did for the eyes. We'll go over here to Our adjustment layers, we will choose a solid color. And for the lips, I already have a color in mind, and I know the hex code for it, and it's 2D0206. And this is just sort of a quick way to get to a very specific color. There's a lot of different ways to come up with hex codes, and I'll probably cover that in an entirely different tutorial. But for now, I already have this one, and I like how this particular color works with this image, so that's the one that I'm going to use. I'm going to set my blending mode to a soft light, and I'm going to drop my opacity because I want to keep as much of the lip texture in place as I can. And that brings us to our layer mask. It's once again all white by default, so we control I to color it everything out. We're going to zoom in on our model here using the magnification tool. Center up my lips here, grab my brush, and I need to make sure that I'm on the right color. Okay. And then we just start working with our layer mask to paint the color in. And lips are difficult for me, and this is why, and that is because unlike the eyes where you can use the eyelids and the eyebrow, your eyes have very hard lines and, boundaries that you can follow to paint them in. And your lips do as well. If you're used to painting in lipstick, you probably have a pretty good idea of how to apply lipstick without it looking ridiculous. And so what I do is I try to I use the hard lines of the lips to kind of I'm definitely going to color in that area. But then you'll notice that that as you move away from the lips, that texture begins to change and it blends with your skin texture. So my big challenge is always how far away from the harder texture of the lips do I really want to move away from when I'm applying these particular effects. So I just kind of play with it until I think it doesn't look good. And I just start in heavy where the hard lines of the lips are, and then as that skin texture changes, I just kind of back out of that kind of slowly. Bit of that. Okay, cool. So, and the other thing about lips is that you really won't know how ridiculous or good it looks until you back out. And so that's what we're going to do. And that actually looks okay. There is a little cleanup that I think work here. Oops. Paint with that color. Again, we got to watch our colors. I sometimes get swept away at the moment, and I don't watch them like I should, which is fine because normally nobody's watching. But kind of feel a little silly in the moment whenever round these out just a little bit more, solidify that line just a tad, and there we go. Back out. And that is a pretty good effect. Now, again, if this was for a paid client, there's a few different techniques that I might have used when applying my mask. I might have went in with like a pencil brush and kind of sketched in the like using lines and things like that, because sometimes you can create an accentuating texture doing that kind of stuff. But for this very basic tutorial, this really satisfies our needs. So that's a really good final result. Okay, so we're looking at our model now, and there's one thing you probably noticed, and I've certainly noticed it, and that is that we have these very striking eye effects here, and we have these really striking lips. We don't really have a whole lot of other visual interest in the face. And what I'm going to do to try to counter that is to add a little bit of eye makeup and try to make more of a connection between the lips and the eyes. So to start doing this, we're going to go ahead and grab a new layer. We're going to set the blending mode to multiply. We are going to grab ourselves a paintbrush here. We're going to set our color to black, though we're not married to that color. We're just going to use it to lay down the effect, and then we can toy with the color a little bit once we've got all the effect laid down. Grab our brush tool. Make sure we have a nice soft brush with no hardness, so that the makeup effect will radiate outwards and kind of create more of a blend. And then because I am using a Cintiq, a Wacom Cintiq graphics tablet, which means that I'm using a stylus to paint directly onto my canvas. If you're just starting out, you've never really done this before, and let's face it, that's why you're watching this tutorial, or at least why you've hung out this long, given that all the techniques I'm covering are so basic. It really is the way to work, because the pressure on the stylus gives you control over how much ink you're actually dropping on your canvas. Unlike a mouse, you have to use other methods. And for the stylus settings, I grab my flow and I drop it to 10%. Now, if you're not using a stylus, you still want to drop your flow to 10%, but you're going to simulate stylus pressure by dropping your opacity, which is this setting right next to flow, down to around 20% or so. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to build up your effect similar to the way that I'm going to do, but I'm going to use pen pressure to kind of do the same thing. And I'm not going to go super crazy with this effect. And the reason for it is because really, when you do facial makeup, you want to spend a lot of time to the way the shape is the way the face is shaped. And the theory behind makeup is that the way that you apply the makeup will actually create the way your cheekbones and your facial features set. And it's kind of time consuming when you're working on a model who's not right in front of you, mainly because you have to account for the differences of the angle of the face and all that kind of fun stuff. And it's really time consuming, and I'm trying to do just a basic tutorial. So we're going to do something super, super simple. I've got a black, I've got my flow is going to be set down to 10%. Opacity is good. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this, and I'm going to hit this about 5 times. And you see how the effect just kind of it spreads out. I'm going to go 6, 7 times. And I'm going to do the same thing over here in the same measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. And it's going to appears darker on this side of the image. And the reason for that is because the lighting is so much different from one side to the other. And that's just part of the challenge of trying to do this. One other aspect of applying digital makeup is you don't want to lose a lot of your skin texture up underneath your layer, and you want to keep your lights mainly intact. And fortunately, because our blend mode on its own, our default blend mode of multiply, doesn't give us that effect right out of the box, we can go down here to effects, to the effects icon, and we have advanced blending options. And the one advanced blending option that I use more than anything else is blend if. And this basically tells the algorithm that if a certain criteria is met, then you're going to blend based on these measurements that we're going to set here. If you drop down the menu here, you can see that you can blend if gray, which would be your midtones. And then you can also operate on individual color channels. But since we want to keep texture and lighting in place, we're going to go with the gray and work on the midtones. And the one that I like is I want to tell the blend mode to pay attention to the layer up underneath this layer, because that's going to define how I want this blend to look. And that is going to be down here. Now, if we wanted to pay more attention to the current layer that we're working on, this one here will get it done. But this is where we're at. And if we grab, again, these picks are light and darker colored to think of it as a shadow and think of it as light. But if you grab this pick and you drag it over, you can really see how the layer is blended based completely on the lighting. And that's just way more extreme than what we're looking for. And fortunately, we can do half measures. We can take this pick, put your cursor on this pick here, hit Alt on your keyboard, and then you can break this pick apart, which allows you to be more selective with the way that you apply the effect. I like to operate, I don't like to go like super big. I like to come over to about 180 or so. And that usually gives us a pretty good effect. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a layer mask over this, and I'm going to turn my flow up. And now I'm going to, because I've got my base makeup set, I'm going to clean up this stuff out of the eyes, and then I'm going to clean up around the eye to give it the makeup a better application. So I'm going to go in here with a nice soft brush set to 100% flow, and I'm going to pull the makeup layer out of that eye. Just like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Just like that. Okay, and now that my eyes are clear again, I'm going to blow up my brush size just a tad. And then I'm going to start cleaning up the makeup application around the eye. First thing I'm going to do is make sure anything I put above the brow is cleaned up and gone. I don't think anything went up that high, but you never know. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull some of the makeup away from the brow. I want to add some distance between the two because, you know, just depending on the type of makeup job you're going for, it gives a good effect, I think. And you can go all the way up to the brow. I've seen women do eye makeup like that, but I really am a fan of a more subtle application of makeup, and so I'm gonna definitely separate this off of the brow, and I'm for sure gonna go here and clean this all off of this nose, both sides. Really like how lighter, because I like that. And then I'm gonna clean over here. That's fairly decent application, very simple. Then I'm gonna tighten this up around in here. And I'm really just eyeballing this. I'm just kind of doing this like really fast. But you can actually use landmarks on the face to try to control, um, give yourself a little bit better perspective. Like the wrinkles up under the eyes or what I was using here, because it's just something real quick that I can use and apply and get a fairly consistent effect. Now, when we zoom out, we have something going on in the skin here. And if I were going to be doing this for a client, I would take this a lot further. I would actually go in and extend these eyelashes and paint these out just a bit more. But just for a down and dirty effect, this is really getting me pretty much the results that I want. And then you can add more layers also and build up these effects in lighter, you know, if you wanted this to come down further, in different shades. For example, like added another layer here, set to multiply. Gonna go ahead and do my blending options and say blend if, and then I'm gonna go about 180, 170. Go a little bit lower. I'm gonna go about like 175, 176, somewhere in that area. Go okay. I'm gonna grab my brush, and then this time I'm going to use a completely different color, maybe something similar to what I used in the lips, which is 2D0206, which is kind of like a blood red kind of a thing. I'm going to set my flow back down to 10% where I had it. Then I could blow this up just like I did before. Drop it in there, drop it in here, add a layer mask, and jump up in here, and then just kind of add a little bit of a blend and blend like these two colors in, like just like that. And it gives us an okay effect. It works what it's meant to do, which is just to kind of supplement this other area. Anyway, and you can stack your layers on top of each other like this, and then just play with some different options you wanted. Here and clean all this stuff up just a tad. It's off the nose, like try to keep all that consistent. And just like that. And so we get some basic makeup, which kind of adds a little bit more visual interest in the face and keeps it just a little bit more consistent. I probably went a little overboard with that, but usually you're not talking to a microphone and you're not trying to worry about time and what's interesting to other people like that whenever you work. So that is actually pretty freeing. So anyway, that's a basic makeup effect. And like I said, there's a lot of different ways that you can apply it. But this right here was just sort of a down and dirty, quick, just an intro to the concept. So now that we've applied our makeup and we have our eyes set and our lips, now it's time to do like some basic finishing touches. And what I like to do is I like to try to finish out with tone. And so we're going to go back and create an adjustment layer using hue and saturation. And I'm going to drop the saturation just a tad, like let's go -35. Let's boost our brightness just a tad. And then if we wanted to, we could also do like some coloring on it. I really don't want to do it that way. I think I like it better. That. And then I live by one very simple rule with image editing. If I capture the perfect image in my lens and I don't feel I have to do anything to it, which that never really happens because you always want to add a little bit of sharpening to the eyes. But if I did, I still would hold to this rule, and it is this: a little S curve makes everything better. So I'll grab a curves adjustment layer, and that brings me to my curve graph here. And by S layer, I mean you make a little bit of an S on your graph. You grab something towards the high end and you push it up, and you grab something towards the low end, which is your shadows, and you drop it down. And you can do that opposite if you want, but really I find that just to tap the contrast just a tad, I go up on my bright end and I drop just a tad on my shadow end. And just like that, I think we get a nice contrasty photo that's some, with some visual interest. And with that, I would call this image complete.